Kevin, I have known you for a few years now. I was your campaign manager when you ran for mayor of Oviedo last year, which was awesome. It was then I got to really know and respect you. You know, I took the job as your campaign manager because I saw something in you. I saw passion, honesty, and I felt your thinking was unique and strong, and I felt you should be heard. So, why do you feel so strongly that you need to speak out about the current crisis happening with Russia and Ukraine?
That's a good question. Well, as you know, and as a lot of people who know me know, I write foreign policy on the side, kind of as a hobby. I've been doing it for years, and my expertise, I believe, is in foreign policy, and more specifically about Russia. I have a very specific Russian policy that I've put together that I think is on the money. And I've shared it with many people, hundreds of people over the last couple of years. But right now seems to be like a critical time in history, in the world, with Russia on the verge of starting another war maybe. So I felt like right now maybe I need to get it out there somehow. That's kind of why I've decided to ask you to come over and do this for me today.
So getting to know you, I know you're qualified in a lot of different areas. So why do you think you are qualified to speak about this topic to the masses?
Well, I've read a number of books on World War II history. I've read also many books about leaders, about World War II leaders, strategy, generals, and that's really helped me understand foreign policy. I really think you have to understand World War II to understand how the Russians think. And anybody who doesn't understand World War II in detail, I don't think is qualified or capable of handling Russia or handling an American policy towards Russia. So I think I'm qualified. Now listen, I'm a street kid from Queens. I never went to college. So that doesn't officially qualify me. I'm no professor. I don't have all these degrees. But I've got a lot of real life knowledge. I've been a negotiator for 40 years. I've owned many different businesses. I'm very successful. I'm a broker and a developer. I worked for one of the largest real estate REITs in the country. I ran Florida for them. Been an elected official. I was a commissioner in Sanford, and I ran for mayor, as you said. So I believe that my opinions are not only strong, but I think I'm on the money on some of this. So I felt like I should talk out about it.
So do you think you have the credibility to get the leaders in Washington to listen to you?
Well, I don't know if I have the credibility, but I believe my thinking is different. I think the things that I'm going to say are not things you hear every day on the TV shows. I believe I'm a very strong American, positive thinking, patriot type guy in a very positive way. I don't think this is a left or right issue. I think this is an American issue. And I think that I'm passionate about it, as you know. And I believe that me saying what I'm going to say, I think will persuade for some to listen to what I'm saying and maybe agree with me.
So how do you want to begin this discussion?
Well, I'm going to begin this discussion like I've done it probably over 100 times before. What I do is I ask a few questions, and I do that for a reason. I ask questions about World War II for the most part, because I've met a lot of people who tell me they believe they fully understand how to handle foreign policy in Russia, and I've found that they don't know very much about World War II. As a matter of fact, I'll tell you right now that the questions that I'm about to ask, out of probably at least 100 people I've asked, no one has answered all 5 questions correctly. No one. I found that amazing. You do have to understand World War II to answer them. Probably 2 have gotten 4 out of 5 correct. I find that just amazing. And usually it opens the door for them to listen intently to what I say. And I've had very few people at the end of my conversation with them. And I'm talking about people who are professionals, people who are very intelligent people who run companies, college graduates, history professors, even politicians. As I spoke to one senator not too long ago and had the same conversation, and he knew very little about this stuff. And by the time I was done, he said, "Holy cow, that's a pretty interesting perspective. You might be right." So Anyway, we'll get right to it because I know I talk too much in general. So I'll ask you the first question. How many Americans died in World War II?
Wow.
I'm asking you now.
Yeah.
I don't think you've heard the questions, so you're going to be my my sample person. You'll be my 101st person I talk to.
Yeah.
So how many do you think?
And I haven't heard these. I would say 500,000.
Dude, you're pretty close. You're actually pretty close. I've had some people guess 10,000. Some people guess 10 million. Very few get close. You're close. 415,000.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. How many Russians do you think died in World War II?
I know more Russians. I'm not an expert. I know more Russians died, so maybe 700,000.
All right. Well, you're right. More Russians did die. And the same thing. I've had some people say 50,000, 20,000, a lot more. And this is where I fully understand where the person's coming from. The Russians lost 25 million people in World War II.
Wow.
Now listen, 25 million. Now we lost 415,000. That's nothing to shake a stick at. These were American lives, and I take that very seriously.
Right.
But the Russians lost 25 million people.
Oh, man.
So you have to understand, the only way to negotiate with a Russian is to think like a Russian, or to understand how Russians think.
Right.
So keep that fact at the top of your head.
Interesting.
Okay, next question. June 22nd, 1941. Ring a bell?
June 22nd. My grandfather was born.
It's pretty old. I mean, most people, and I tell people, I don't expect most people to know these things.
Was that when Hitler turned on Russia?
Dude, very good.
Was it close?
Yeah, very close. Very close. I'll give you another hint, but I got to think most people do not even get that close, not even near it. The word Barbarossa, ring a bell?
Mm-mm. Isn't that the guy from Welcome Back, Kotter? Barbarino.
Barbarino, very good. No, that's not him. Okay, well, I'll give you a little bit of the details now. June 22nd, 1941 was called Barbarossa. And you're right, it was the surprise attack of Germany on Russia. Nobody knows, most people don't realize this, but Germany and Russia had a peace pact. Yeah, just like Russia and China now have a peace pact. And how'd that work out for them? Not very well. So on June 22nd, 1941, the Russians surprise attacked the Germans surprise attacked Russia. 4.5 million troops crossed that Russian border. And they went right into Germany, and they got all the way to Moscow. So think about it. The German army almost took out the entire country of Russia in that area. Now, the reason why they didn't win, they didn't make that happen, is because they sent about 1/3 of Hitler's troops went south to knock out Yugoslavia because they wanted their oil wells. By the time they got back north, they lost 6 weeks. And that 6-week delay, by the time the Germans got to Russia, and most people know this, it was the Russian winter that defeated the German army. Many people remember that. This stuff's all over the History Channel. The thing is, people have to understand how the Russians think. They lost 25 million people in that war. They almost lost their entire country in that war. Think about this. We've got oceans on both sides of us. We've got Canada to the north. We've got Mexico to the south. The last time we had foreign troops on our soil was the British in 1812 when they burned down the White House. I mean, we have no understanding of what it feels like to have somebody almost take over your country, but the Russians do. So at the end of the day, the thinking today is, in my opinion, is we have an 1,800-mile border, east and west, for the western, the NATO nations, all the way down to Russia on Russia. They have an 1,800-mile border that they're worried about people crossing it. You see, the Russians aren't bad people. And they're not the evil empire. They're not even communist anymore. They're not trying to take over the world. The Russians have 143 million people. Their economy is 1/8 the size of ours. They have one military installation outside of their sphere of influence. We have 512 military installations around the world, 360 million people, and a blockbuster economy. We could crush them in a second in a war. We have nothing to fear for the Russians. We give more money to dictators who are far more evil than Putin will ever be. They're not even communist anymore. The Russians are not trying to take over the world. But they almost lost their country. They have a perfect right to be very sensitive about their border. And that's the point. Very sensitive. They have a perfect right to be. We don't understand that because when we negotiate with the Russians, we don't think like Russians. You have to understand the Russians to negotiate with the Russians. So in my opinion, well, I'll give you one more question. I forgot about the last question. June 22nd, 2016. What happened on that day? What was that day?
June 22nd, 2016. Trump had a bad tweet.
That happened a lot of times back then. It's still happening today. But
that I'm not sure of.
well, Trump wasn't elected yet. But on that day, believe it or not, that is the day that I wrote my Russia policy. And I have this written down in about 10 pages, about 30 paragraphs, because there's a lot more information that goes into this policy that I'm going to say on this tape because I don't want to go too long. But that was the day I finished this policy, and I actually did send it to Trump, and I said, use this in the election because I believed in it. But here's what happened on that day. On that day. That is the 75th anniversary of that German surprise attack on Russia. June 22nd, 2016, 75th anniversary. That's like the Russia's Pearl Harbor, only times 10, times 1,000. The Russians celebrate that day, not celebrate it, but they acknowledge it. They remember it every year, just like we do with Pearl Harbor. On that day, that very sacred day, on a 75th anniversary, which was a biggie, guess what we did on that day?
Not sure.
See, and this is how, in my opinion, how high-minded, weak-willed, and wrong-headed our politicians are when they try to negotiate with Russia. Here's what we did. On that day, Russia, in 2014, they kind of went into Ukraine with some tanks and stuff because they were angry about Ukraine leaning to the West. Well, we weren't happy about that. So on that day, and this is the Obama government, and I blame left and right on this issue, what we did, NATO military exercises on the Russian border to show the Russians that we weren't happy about them putting tanks in Ukraine. On that sacred day, the 75th anniversary of that surprise attack, the Russians lost 25 million people in that war. In my opinion, that was stupid and it was foolish. Let me tell you what I would have done on that day if I was the president. Not saying I would be, but I could be someday, right?
That's right.
Here's what I would have done. I would have said, we don't like the fact that you're in Ukraine, that you put tanks in there, and we're not condoning that, and we're not acknowledging that, and not accepting that. But on this day, this very sacred day, we're thanking you for your losses in World War II. We're thanking you for your sacrifices in World War II. We're thanking you for being our partners in defeating Hitler in World War II. See, we should thank them for the sacrifices they made in World War II. They lost 25 million people. If we'd have done that, we'd have Putin eating out of our hand right now. The Russians want respect, and they want to feel safe. They don't want to take over the world. As far as I'm concerned, that's the way I would lead my policy. And you know why? Because if we keep doing what we're doing now, making Russia the big bad guys. Now again, I'm an American patriot. I'm not some sympathizer here. But I'm a strategic guy. If we keep pushing like we're doing now, we're pushing Russia right into China's hands. Now, everybody's been saying things like that now. I was saying this 5 years ago. Right now, the Russians have joint military exercises with China. Matter of fact, with China and Iran. We're pushing them into China's hands. So here's the bottom line, and I'm going to just say this plainly. The only way to avoid World War III, and I believe this, the only way is for America to be very close with Russia. You see, it's only, the Chinese are already stronger than we are militarily. If not militarily, certainly technologically. We don't want to go down that road. Everybody knows that any country that gets that much stronger than all the other countries eventually throws their weight around, and China's already doing it. With Taiwan, with Hong Kong. They're doing it now because they've got Russia backing them up. But keep in mind, the Russians had a peace pact with Germany. And look what happened to them then. Don't you think they're thinking that could happen with China? They have a 2,800-mile border with China. And China is far more powerful than Russia is militarily. And they're right on their border. The Russians would much rather be best friends with us. We're no threat to them. We're on the other side of the world. They would much rather have a peace pact with us and know that if China ever attacked them, we would be back in Russia. And you know what? If we had Russia on our team, we would have Russia back in boxing China in from the north, and us and the rest of our allies could box them in from the east, south, and west. And listen, the Chinese are not evil people. But everybody needs accountability. They just need to be accountable, and they need to behave. People don't behave by themselves. But if they see Russia on our team, they will behave, and there'll be no Third World War. I believe that. And my last question. Have you ever heard of the Belt and Road Initiative?
No.
You know, it's amazing to me. Our lousy media spends all their time fighting with each other, left and right. They don't give us any real news. I watch 8 different news stations every day. It's the only way to get balance. You got to watch them all. And you know what I learned the most from on foreign policy? NHK. It's a Japanese news station out of Tokyo. You learn what China's really doing when you listen to them because the Japanese are watching those guys. The Belt and Road Initiative is China taking over the world economically. Now, I won't go into any details. You can Google it and figure it out. They are taking over the world economically. And you know what? They're a powerful nation and they're not bad people. I mean, they're communist. I get that. Eventually, that maybe will work itself out like it did in many of these other communist countries. But at the end of the day, I don't think they're evil people. I think most people are good people. Some leaders are not. But at the end of the day, we just have to keep them accountable. We just have to make them realize they can't just do what they want. They have to behave. The only way that happens is if we're best friends with Russia. I know people don't want to hear that today. No newscaster has ever said that. Nobody's ever said what I just said. Have you ever heard what I just said on the news from a pundit, from a politician, from a military officer?
Never.
No. You've never heard it. I don't know if they don't think it, or maybe they just don't get it, or maybe they don't understand World War II. I don't understand why. Abraham Lincoln, quote, "Have I not destroyed my enemies by making them my friends?" Another quote, "You keep your friends close and your enemies closer." Listen, I'm not naive. I think the Russians are good people, and I think they're paranoid about their border, to the point of almost starting a war like they are about now. But let me tell you something. Putin is serious about feeling threatened by Ukraine leaning our way. Know why? Think about it. When that wall came down and the Soviet Union went away, you know what happened? Well, we kind of told the Russians, if you drop the Soviet Union stuff and you let these people be free, what do you want? And what they said was, don't bring these people into NATO. Leave them alone. They had a commitment from one of our people. I don't know who it was, James Baker, one of those guys, who said, we won't do that. And we held that for a while. 1998, we started changing our thinking. We started thinking we needed to make sure that we were more powerful than everybody on the planet, and the Russians were bad guys. Do you know how many nations, after that wall came down, and 1989 are in? There's probably a dozen nations on the eastern side of Europe that are all now in NATO. And the Russians were watching this happen. Like dominoes, they're dropping one at a time, and they're saying, holy cow, they told us they wouldn't do this. And here they are doing it. There was a time where Putin, I think it was in 2002, first came into power, and he saw what was happening. And he said, we'd like to join NATO. We wouldn't have them. I'm telling you, the Russians aren't the bad guys. Our politicians are a bunch of freaking idiots. The Russians aren't the bad guys, but we got to be very careful how we handle them. To negotiate with a Russian, you got to think like a Russian. And when we start talking about things like sanctions, the Russians almost lost their entire country. They lost 25 million people. Do you think sanctions is going to scare the Russians? Those guys are warriors. We want them on our side. We need to be good friends with Russia. We need to bring them back away from China and have them lead our way. They'd much rather be our best friend. And then we could have Russia taking care of all the things that we don't want to do over there. I could go on and on. Syria is a perfect example. Russia wanted to fight side by side with us against ISIS in Syria. But no, we said, no, we can't do that because you guys are the evil empire. So if we would have backed Russia and said, listen, you need to pull this, you need to reel this guy Assad in and not let him act like a knucklehead dictator, and you need to keep Iran back where they belong, and we'll fight side by side with you. That war would have been over in less than 6 months. Assad would have been put back in power. He was going to be put back in power anyway. We didn't have the political will to remove him. Instead, we backed some ragtag group of Arab guys who changed sides like they changed underwear. So what happened? 7 years later, 700,000 Syrians killed, 3 to 4 million Syrians and Muslims spread all over the world, running away from that fight, and Assad's back in power. Fools. We could have stopped all that by just trusting Russia as a partner. That's just one example. We can get Russia to get Iran to do whatever we want them to do. We can get Russia to help us with the guy over there in North Korea. We can certainly get them to help in a lot of other areas, but they need to know they can trust us. Today, they can't trust us. We've proven that. I know I said I sound like a big Russian fan here, but I'm telling you, I've been to Russia. I've done ministry in Russia. The people of Russia are good people. And whether Putin's a good guy or not, I don't know. I don't know him personally. But I can tell you this, they don't feel safe. They don't feel they can trust us. That's got to change, or there's going to be World War III. That's my policy. I've got a million other facts, but I've already gone on way too long with this. So anyway, that's all I have to say.